I'm 33 now, and for the first time in my life, I truly understand what peace feels like. If you had told me 2 years ago that I'd be living in a $5 million home on a quiet street, far removed from my family, I would have laughed it off. Back then, I was still chasing something I didn't yet realize I never needed: my parents' approval. My name is Noah, and this is how my family taught me that sometimes walking away is the most powerful response. Growing up, my sister Emma and I were complete opposites. She was outgoing, confident, and effortlessly likable. I was the quiet one, the kid who read during dinner and spent weekends repairing old computers instead of going out. My parents often said, "Emma's our sunshine." I used to joke that made me the cloud. It stopped being funny when I realized they meant it. Emma was the favored child in every way. When she wanted ballet lessons, my parents paid for custom shoes and private instructors. When I wanted to join a robotics club, they said it was too costly for something that wouldn't lead anywhere. She got a car at 17. I got a bus pass. At first, it wasn't jealousy, it was confusion. I believed that if I worked hard enough, they'd notice me too. So I did. I earned straight A's, secured a full scholarship to a state university, and graduated early. When I told my mom, her response was, "Good. That means you can start paying your own bills sooner." I wish that was an exaggeration, but that tone defined my 20s. Emma's achievements were celebrated. Mine were treated as expectations. When Emma got engaged at 26, my parents hosted a lavish engagement party: catering, decorations, a photographer, everything. When I told them I'd been promoted to senior developer, my dad simply said, "Don't get too comfortable. Companies replace people all the time." A year later, wedding planning began. Emma wanted an elaborate outdoor ceremony with a designer dress and over 100 guests. My parents proudly talked about covering the costs. One afternoon, my mom casually mentioned they were helping Emma financially because weddings are expensive. I didn't think much of it until I visited home weeks later. My dad was at the kitchen table, surrounded by receipts: flowers, catering deposits, venue fees. I saw the total: $80,000. I asked if they were really giving her that much. My mom responded calmly, saying it was her big day and she deserved it. When I asked about myself, her smile faded. She said, "I didn't need help. I was single, independent, and didn't even like parties. You've always been fine on your own." That sentence stayed with me. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just realized I'd been quietly written out of my own family's story. I tried to let it go. I told myself money wasn't love. But when I later saw the wedding photos, my parents glowing, the venue extravagant, it hit hard. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner. I wasn't mentioned in any speeches. A friend later told me my parents said I was too busy to attend. They hadn't even asked. That's when I stopped calling. I skipped Christmas, sent a brief text, and focused entirely on work. I poured everything into my projects: long nights, early mornings, constant effort. My career advanced faster than expected. When my company was acquired, I received a payout that changed my life overnight. Around that time, I met Maya, a real estate agent with sharp humor and genuine confidence. For the first time, someone believed in me without conditions. We bought a modest home together, and when I explained my family situation, she said something that stuck: "You keep trying to buy their love. Maybe it's time you invest in yourself." I took that advice seriously. I started a small software consultancy with people I trusted. Within a year, it grew beyond anything I'd imagined. Global clients, major contracts, the kind of success my parents never expected from me. They weren't around to see it. I kept my distance: no visits, no calls, only occasional polite messages. 2 years after Emma's wedding, I received a text from an unknown number. It was my mom asking me to call her. The tone felt forced. When I did, she asked if I'd bought a new house. She said Emma had driven by and seen it. My mom explained that Emma was upset, questioning how it was fair that I lived so well. Then the request came, suggesting I help Emma financially because she was struggling after having a baby. I reminded her she once told me I didn't deserve help. She had no response. That call clarified everything. The pattern hadn't changed. Emma received sympathy. I received guilt. Over the next few weeks, messages followed from my parents and Emma, each escalating from polite to passive-aggressive. I was told I'd changed, that money had made me cold. Then came an invitation to my nephew's first birthday. Emma had named him after me. At first, I thought it was an olive branch. When I called to ask about a gift, my mom suggested that instead of a present, I quietly help them pay bills. I declined the invitation. She accused me of being cruel and embarrassing the family. 2 days later, my dad called, claiming neutrality while asking me to be the bigger person. I told him I'd done that for 30 years. I skipped the party. When I returned home, I had 17 missed calls and messages blaming me for making things awkward. Weeks later, my mom left a voicemail implying Emma might do something drastic if I didn't reach out. Maya recognized it immediately. Emotional leverage. I refused to engage. Then my mom showed up unannounced at my gate. She praised my success before accusing me of abandoning Emma. When she said, "We raised you," something finally snapped. I told her they raised Emma and merely tolerated me. She warned I'd regret this and left. A week later, I received an email from Emma's husband. The subject line read, "You owe us an explanation." The message accused me of cruelty and abandonment. Near the end, he warned they'd take it further. 2 days later, I found out what that meant. Emma had posted publicly on Facebook, accusing me of flaunting wealth and refusing to help family. She included photos of my home, my car, and an old text taken out of context. The post gained traction quickly. Worse, she emailed my clients and partners, falsely claiming I was under investigation for financial misconduct, attaching fabricated screenshots. I spent days correcting the damage, calling lawyers, reassuring clients, providing proof. My records were clean, but the reputational harm was real. When my mom called afterward, she blamed me for pushing Emma too far. That's when I finally said what I'd held back for years. I told her she'd taught Emma that there were no consequences, that she'd always defend her, no matter what. I hung up. The next morning, I learned someone had attempted to access my company's financial accounts. The IP traced to my parents' town. That's when something shifted. The anger became focused. Calm, intentional. I told Maya I was done trying to keep the peace. She didn't argue. She just said to do it properly. Facts only. So I began collecting everything. Messages, emails, false claims, every attempt to cross a line. And that's where things truly began to change. I carefully documented the company statements, traced IP logs, consulted my lawyer, and contacted a cybersecurity investigator. The findings were clear. Emma and Jacob had been careless. They used their home Wi-Fi for everything, including sending the fake emails. Every message they believed was anonymous led directly back to their address. Even so, I didn't act right away. I wanted to be certain that when I moved forward, it would be final and impossible to undo. The breaking point came during a video call with one of our international clients. He spoke carefully, almost apologetically. "Noah, I don't like bringing this up," he said, "but someone claiming to be a relative contacted our company." He explained that the person accused me of lying about my credentials. My stomach dropped. I asked who it was. After a pause, he said she introduced herself as Emma, my sister. That crossed the line. This was no longer family conflict. It was deliberate sabotage. I ended the call, shut my laptop, and sat quietly for a long time. Outside, the afternoon was calm and bright, completely disconnected from what was happening. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "She's trying to destroy my life," I said. "Fine. Then the truth comes out." Maya didn't ask for details. She simply replied, "Then it's time." By then, I already knew how this would end. Not through confrontation, not through anger, but through evidence. Clear, verifiable proof that would expose exactly what had been happening. I just needed one final piece. That arrived a few days later in the form of a letter in my mailbox. The return address was my parents' home. The sender was my father. Inside was something I never expected to see. In that moment, I understood this situation wasn't only about Emma. It involved all of them. The envelope was thick and heavy. My father's handwriting was precise, the same style he used when he wanted to appear composed. I sat at the kitchen counter in the morning light, holding it for a moment before opening it. The letter felt final. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a letter written in my father's measured, formal tone. He explained that he and my mother were concerned about how things had escalated. He accused me of cutting off communication and involving lawyers, saying that wasn't how I was raised. He stated they were formally separating themselves from any financial or business ties with me. Enclosed, he said, was a statement they planned to file removing their names from shared property rights or trusts. He ended by saying he hoped I would one day understand that family mattered more than money. At first, I was confused. I didn't share property or finances with them. Then I looked at the second document. It was a formal withdrawal from a family trust, one I didn't even know existed. I read it repeatedly. The trust had been established 20 years earlier under my grandparents' estate. My parents were listed as executors. Emma and I were named beneficiaries. Over time, the structure had been altered, placing Emma in control and directing funds toward her wedding, mortgage support, and other expenses. My share had been quietly used to fund her life. The letter wasn't about distancing themselves from me. It was about protecting themselves. When Maya saw the documents, she immediately asked if I had known about the trust. I hadn't. We investigated further, and everything confirmed it. My name had likely been kept on record to legitimize the trust for tax purposes. And now that scrutiny was coming, they were erasing me. I didn't feel angry. I felt empty. That night, I barely slept. I walked through the house replaying every word. It confirmed what I had avoided admitting for years. I was never seen as family, only as something useful. The next morning, I drove without direction until I reached the coast. The waves were rough, the sky gray. I sat there for hours, detached from everything. A message from my mother came through, asking me not to make things worse. There was no apology, only blame. That's when it became clear. They would never understand. Evidence wouldn't change their narrative. So I stopped trying to explain. For weeks, I withdrew completely. My partners handled work while I existed in a state of exhaustion. Maya stayed close, supportive but quiet. One evening, she told me I was waiting for closure that would never come. She was right. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my lawyer and requested a full review of the trust, not to contest it, but to document it. Then I contacted my accountant and began restructuring everything. New accounts, added security, and a new LLC. By the end of the week, there were no remaining financial ties that could be exploited. Still, the loss lingered. It wasn't financial. It was the loss of believing I had a family. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos, childhood moments that looked warm and genuine. I closed the laptop and acknowledged that version of the past no longer existed. From that point on, I worked differently, quietly, with intention. I wasn't focused on revenge, only stability. Months passed. Contact stopped. Online accusations disappeared, likely after legal pressure. Life became manageable again. Then, about 6 months later, I received an email from an old neighbor. She mentioned my parents were selling their home and that Emma and Jacob were moving in after financial trouble. That's when it became clear. The trust funds were gone. I felt brief sympathy, but it faded when I learned someone had attempted to withdraw money from an old joint account that still carried my name. Even after everything, they tried to take what remained. That was the moment I stopped feeling guilty. I began preparing, not out of anger, but clarity. I wanted the truth documented, ready, if needed. The real turning point came quietly. Legal work finalized, assets secured, and for the first time, I felt emotional space. I stopped waiting for messages. I stopped defending myself. Opportunities I'd once feared felt manageable. I expanded my business, traveled, built teams, and focused on integrity. The company grew steadily, then rapidly. Recognition followed. Life became full again. But the past had one final test. A voicemail arrived from an estate attorney representing a retired couple from my childhood neighborhood. They had passed away and left behind a small scholarship fund for students interested in computer science. They remembered me helping them years ago and wanted me to oversee it. I accepted. That project reminded me who I was before all of this. I built the platform, reviewed applications, and moved forward, quietly, honestly, and on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Within a few months, the program had supported its first 5 students. One of them sent me a letter that read, "Thank you for believing in people you've never even met." That single line meant more to me than any award ever had. After that, momentum built quickly. The scholarship gained attention. Local media covered it, and soon we were partnering with universities. What started small began to grow rapidly into something larger. People no longer associated my name only with business. They connected it with opportunity. That shift led to invitations, tech conferences, leadership panels, charity galas. I attended a few, mostly out of curiosity. At one business event in San Francisco, a journalist asked during a Q&A, "What motivates you now that you've achieved success?" I paused before answering. Freedom, the kind that comes from knowing no one owns a part of you anymore. It wasn't planned. It just came naturally, but the reaction made it clear the message resonated. That quote spread online. It was reposted, shared, and highlighted. It became one of those motivational lines you see on LinkedIn with a grayscale photo behind it. I didn't care about online attention, but it served one unexpected purpose. It reached them. I didn't find out until months later. I was in New York finishing a meeting when Maya called. "You won't believe this," she said, sounding both amused and cautious. "Your mother tried to contact us again." I froze. "What?" She sent a handwritten letter to the office, addressed to Mr. Noah Patterson, founder and CEO. She must have seen the articles. I took a slow breath. "What did it say?" Maya hesitated. "I didn't open it. It's on your desk." When I returned, the envelope sat neatly beside my computer. Cream paper, elegant cursive, my mother's handwriting. I didn't open it immediately. I just stared, remembering the last letter she'd written and how deeply it had hurt. Eventually, I unfolded it. "Noah, we saw you on the news. Your father and I are proud of what you've accomplished, even if we don't always understand your choices. I know we've had our differences, but maybe it's time to move past them. We aren't getting younger, and Emma could really use her brother right now. Things haven't been easy for her. Maybe we could have dinner and talk. Family should stay together." There it was again. The same pattern, softened by polite language and fueled by guilt. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, but clarity. They hadn't changed. They weren't seeking reconciliation. They wanted access to success. That realization didn't hurt this time. It simply confirmed what I already knew. A week later, the company hosted a conference in Los Angeles. More than 200 people attended: developers, investors, students, journalists. I delivered a keynote on resilience and reinvention. Midway through, I noticed a young man near the back taking intense notes. He reminded me of myself at 20, uncertain, driven, overlooked. After the talk, he approached me. He said he'd read the article about me and shared that his own family didn't support his path either. Hearing my story had helped him. That was when something clicked. I realized I no longer needed my old family. I'd built a new one. People who believed in me, grew with me, and didn't measure my value by what I could give them. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Still, the story didn't end there. Not long after that conference, just as everything seemed settled, I received another call, this time from an unknown number with a familiar area code. I answered, expecting a journalist or client. Instead, a quiet voice said, "Noah, it's Jacob." I froze. He sounded different, tired, defeated. "I know you don't want to hear from me," he said, "but you need to know what's happening. It's about Emma and your parents." His next words made my chest tighten. Even though I'd moved on, I wasn't ready for what he was about to say. "They're in serious trouble," he continued. I leaned back, keeping my voice steady. "Define trouble." He hesitated. "The trust is gone. Completely. Your father's been borrowing against it for years. The last investment failed. A real estate deal. They owe nearly $500,000. Selling the house barely covered the mortgage." I stayed silent. I'd suspected the trust was empty, but hearing it confirmed felt different. There was a strange sense of closure, like watching something finally burn out. Jacob went on. "They tried refinancing through someone Emma knew, but the deal was fraudulent. They lost everything. Charges are possible if they can't repay." I closed my eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" He exhaled shakily. "They're desperate, and your mom is blaming you. She says you owe them, that you caused this by turning your back. She's talking about going public again, this time with reporters." That caught my attention. "Reporters?" I asked. He explained she'd contacted a local outlet, they're planning to claim I built my success by exploiting family funds. She said she had proof, statements, emails, documents. She believed she could make it look like I stole from them. For a moment, all I heard was my own breathing. What I felt wasn't anger. It was clarity, calm and focused. "Thank you for telling me," I said. Jacob sighed. He said he wasn't doing this for my parents, but for Emma. She was scared. But my mother wouldn't stop until she ruined me. Then it's time I stopped letting her. I replied. After the call, I sat quietly, organizing everything I'd collected over the past 2 years: emails, records, messages. I had more than enough to prove my innocence. But this wasn't about defense anymore. It was about ending the narrative. Maya came into my office with coffee. She read my expression immediately. What did they do now? They're trying to frame me, I said. She didn't look surprised. Then it's time to tell the truth. I nodded, all of it. Over the next week, I prepared. I alerted our PR team not to hide the story, but to be ready. If my family wanted this public, I would meet them there, on my terms. I also contacted my lawyer and authorized a full audit of the Patterson Family Trust. I wanted every transaction traced and documented. 2 weeks later, the audit was complete. The findings were clear. My name had been used repeatedly to approve disbursements I never authorized. Digital consent forms had been falsified using an old e-signature template from years earlier. They had stolen from me under my own identity and now planned to accuse me publicly. So I waited. 3 days later, an article appeared in the Midland Tribune titled "Tech CEO's Family Claims Betrayal. He Built His Empire with Our Money." The piece relied heavily on emotional quotes from my parents. Emma wasn't mentioned. They were framed as struggling parents abandoned by a greedy son. By that evening, my response was ready. Calm, professional, supported by facts. My statement explained that all trust-related financial activity occurred without my consent and that verified audits proved misuse of my identity. I declined further comment. Alongside that statement, I released public documentation to a legal repository, redacted but thorough. Within hours, the narrative changed. The same outlet issued an update citing contradictory evidence and possible fraud. By morning, national outlets picked it up. Blogs, tech sites, business podcasts. The story was no longer about me as a villain. It was about accountability. I didn't celebrate. I stayed silent. A few days later, my lawyer forwarded a message from the county prosecutor. An investigation had been opened into trust misuse and identity fraud. The potential defendants were my parents. What I felt wasn't revenge. It was relief. I later arranged an interview focused not on scandal, but resilience. We discussed integrity, peace, and growth. When asked about my upbringing, I said, in every possible way, sometimes the best lessons come from the worst teachers. It was enough. The noise faded. Assets were seized pending investigation. Emma moved out and later filed for separation. I stayed out of it. 6 months later, my parents appeared unannounced in my office lobby. They looked smaller, worn down. I led them to a private room. My father said I'd embarrassed them. I reminded him they'd accused me publicly and forged my name. They said they were desperate. I said Emma was an adult. He said they did what was best for family. I replied, no, you did what was best for Emma. They admitted they'd lost everything and looked to me for help. I told them I wasn't the solution. I offered one thing, a donation in their names to an emergency housing fund. If they qualified, they could apply. They left angry and ashamed. Weeks later, I learned they'd moved into a small apartment. The investigation ended without charges, but their records remained marked. Emma moved away. The silence finally settled. One evening, sitting on my patio again, Maya asked if I ever thought about them. Sometimes, I said, not with anger, just distance. She said I'd won. I smiled. No, I just stopped playing. As the sun set, I thought about who I used to be, the boy who thought love had to be earned. I wished I could tell him this. Peace doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself. I raised my glass slightly and whispered, here's to letting go. And for the first time, I truly meant it.